topic I am talking about today is mental illness among homeless people. It is a very common assumption in today's society that mental illness is very popular among homeless people. It may even be the cause of their homelessness. After doing some research, I found two articles that talked about this topic in detail, and I was very surprised about the results that were found in them. The first article I found was titled "Myth of Pervasive Mental Illness from Social Problems," found in the journal published by David Snow and published by Oxford University in 1986. This article started off talking about how homelessness is a problem, and it's a very popular idea that they are mentally ill and that this causes their homelessness, especially after looking at all the media coverage. Usually the media are very dramatic. In fact, in a Time magazine, it talks when talking about homelessness, they claim that homeless people are not even a threat to public safety because they're too crazy to be dangerous. This article focuses on unattached adult homeless, and their definition of homelessness is an absence of permanent housing, supportive family bonds, and consensually defined roles of social utility and moral worth. The studies consisted of two different strategies, both within a 20-month period that took place in Austin, Texas. The first strategy was when they hung around and observed on the homeless people on the streets for about 12 months, which consisted of 164 individuals. The other strategy was tracking people and keeping track of what is going on with them through institutions. And they found through this that many of the people were not permanent residents of Austin, Texas, but they were just passing through. To be considered mentally ill, they had to have had contact with a mental health agency or be officially diagnosed. There were three criteria for the first strategy. They either had to be previously institutionalized, diagnosed by other homeless people, or just completely bizarre that there was no other rationale for why they could be acting this way. However, their results showed that the most common diagnosis for homeless people was drug and alcohol addiction. The populations of mentally ill, of homeless, non-paired homeless, or state institutionalized were not significantly different demographically. Surprisingly, out of the mentally ill, 56% of them had previously applied for a job, which goes against the common idea that homeless people are just too lazy to get jobs, which results in why they are homeless. They also did not take advantage of Salvation Army services or any institutions. Their results show that for the first strategy, the people on the street, that 10% of them, 10% of those homeless people proved to have a mental illness. And in the tracking sample, 16% of those people proved to have a mental illness. And of that 16%, 10% had been previously institutionalized. In conclusion, this article states that the connection between homeless and mental illness is an overstatement and is not really a strong relationship at all. But, however, compared with other studies, the percent with mental illness was rather low, whereas other tests range from 40 to 50% of the homeless having mental diseases. These differences could be caused by deinstitutionalization, medicalization, or different definitions of mental status. The second article I studied was called "The Depression Among the Homeless," published by American Sociological Association in the Journal of Health and Social Behavior. The author was Mark Liguori and published in 1990. This starts off saying how there is very little known about depression, especially among the homeless. This study consists of 150 shelter and street-based homeless people in Birmingham, Alabama. Within this article, they often compare the general public to the homeless population. When we think of the general population, we can usually pick out those who would fit, we can be a stereotype for who would be depressed. Commonly, these people are minorities, women, poor, or people who are not married, for example. This article really focuses on what causes depression and the many characteristics that are involved with it. They focus on two areas of characteristics: socio-demographic and life circumstances. The socio-demographic characteristics consist of age, sex, race, education, and health. The life circumstances consist of life events, daily hassles, type of environment, and the duration of how long a person has been homeless. Within this study, they interviewed people for about an hour to determine how their mental health was. Their definition of homeless was without customary access to a conventional dwelling or residence. The most common characteristics they found after they interviewed people that most people were typically between the ages 20 to 39, were male, and were white. And even though they interviewed both sheltered and street homeless people, they found that there were more sheltered individuals. Their results showed for the general population, less than 20% show mental illness, but the 59% of the homeless people that they interviewed have depression. They called the depression probable clinical closeness. For their interviews, they had people answer questions rating how they felt about certain questions, especially relating to depression. They would answer 1 for very low or 5 for very high, and they took the average of these results to find these percentages. In conclusion, they thought that their results were much lower than they originally thought, and they found that psychological resources have the biggest impact. However, they originally thought that social supports had the biggest impact, but this proves wrong because they cannot reduce stress as efficiently as psychological resources. Overall, after looking at these two studies, I was very surprised. I had always assumed that had a very strong relationship with mental illness. The difference in the studies could be caused by a different amount of things. For example, the first article that I did focused on mental illness as a whole, whereas the second article focused mainly on just depression. However, I thought it was very interesting that it disproved the very common assumption that they are linked, and I thought this was a very interesting topic for me.